Welcome to Accelerate Your Journey to the Cloud. Move your GXP regulated workloads to Microsoft Azure. One in a series of webinars by HealthIMPACT Live, sponsored by Microsoft. My name is Megan Antonelli, CEO of HealthIMPACT, and I'll be moderating this session, which features top thinkers in moving your GXP regulated workforce to the cloud. Workload to the cloud. We are excited to welcome Dave Meyers, National Director of Life Sciences at Microsoft, and Vishal Sharma, VP of Digital Trust and Transformation at USDM Life Sciences. First, some quick logistics. The audience is muted, but we're happy to take questions during the Q&A period. Please submit your questions via the Questions tab on the right. The presentation is being recorded and will be available with handouts for viewing after the event. And you'll receive an email with the link to the recording as well as the handouts and a feedback survey, which we greatly appreciate you taking the time to complete. Today, we are excited to bring you top thinkers in cloud technology. At HealthIMPACT, we expect our audience to do a little work, so I'm going to assume you've read our distinguished speakers' bios, but I will highlight that Dave Meyers began his career with Microsoft in 1997 and is now the National Director for Life Sciences Industry in the U.S. Health and Life Sciences Group at Microsoft. He has an extensive background in health IT policy. He was directly involved in the national policy and technical dialogue on the ERA and High-Tech Acts, the Affordable Care Act, and worked directly with CMS on the MITA development. In addition, we have Vishal Sharma. He is the VP of Digital Trust and Transformation at USDM Life Sciences. He has more than 20 years of experience in life sciences, providing consulting services in the areas of digital transformation and cloud adoption. Before USDM, Vishal was a consultant focused on agile best practices to optimize enterprise analytics and provide business growth insights. Today, we will be running through the challenges and trends in life sciences, how you can accelerate the migration of your regulated workload to Azure with Unify Public Cloud, delivery model designed to address SaaS business applications, PaaS cloud services, and IaaS global infrastructure. Benefits of moving GXP workflows to the cloud-based global infrastructure, the FDA outlook on cloud compliance, and lessons learned from hundreds of USDM Cloud Assurance migrations. Then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dave Meyers. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you to HealthIMPACT for hosting this webinar today, and our colleagues at USDM for joining us. And thank you to the audience for taking time out of your day and spending it with us, which we hope will be informative and actionable in terms of accelerating your journey to the cloud. As we get into the agenda today, I wanted to just point out our mission at Microsoft and talk a little bit about what we're doing in health and life sciences. Our mission is bold. It is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And arguably, healthcare, at times, healthcare and life sciences have been a little bit behind in the digital transformation journey, and it's not for lack of trying. It's a highly regulated industry. There are business model distortions on the healthcare side, and obviously patient care and outcomes and safety are of the utmost importance. So we have additional challenge and additional motivation around our mission in healthcare, and that is to empower our customers and partners to make healthcare more personal, effective, and affordable. So we take that mission seriously. And if I can figure out how to advance the slide, there we go. I want to talk about how we apply that in life sciences. So Microsoft for Life Sciences is focused around these three pillars. This is how we deliver on that mission statement. And the first is to accelerate scientific innovation. And when you think about the advent of the cloud and the next generation of devices or edge computing, that has really unlocked many new opportunities for innovation that wouldn't have even been possible a few years ago. I mean, there are a lot of theoretical applications that are now possible because of cloud computing. And as we look at those applications across the value chain in life sciences, we're seeing applications of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, vision computing, machine reading of reports and study results, genomics and other omics, immunomics sequencing, RNA sequencing, DNA sequencing, these massive, massive workloads that would not really be possible without the cloud. Simulations of molecules and using real world data to develop synthetic control arms for clinical trials, connected labs, virtual labs, all of those exciting advancements under accelerating the scientific innovation. We also, under the next pillar of enhancing workforce experience, want to enable your people, your organization to be more productive and collaborative, particularly across organizational boundaries. And we've seen recently with COVID more and more this level of cooperation and collaboration across organizations. So the ability to be productive and connected at any time, anywhere, remotely, in a trusted and secure environment is critically important these days. And then finally, the last pillar is around building operational agility. And that's things like enabling the factory of the future, or Industry 4.0 kinds of scenarios with IoT supported sensors and connected systems, supporting agile and flexible manufacturing environments, both in your physical plant and facilities, but in this new emerging rash of contract relationships, contract manufacturing that we're seeing in recent weeks and months. And again, all of that without sacrificing compliance. So we know that there are, we recognize there are significant challenges in life sciences. For one thing, recently, we've all had to modify our plans, shift our plans and roadmaps to deal with a pandemic, something that none of us in our lifetimes have dealt with at this scale. So we've seen halting of clinical trials, shifting of work to home and remote locations, shutting down certain operations. It's been a really challenging time for sure. And as I mentioned earlier, this has always been a highly regulated, complicated environment, and that continues. And now more than ever, we need the flexibility and scale of the cloud as we go from responding to COVID, to recovering from COVID, to eventually reimagining or reemerging on the other side. So the challenges, both new and historical, are there, and we're trying to address those head on. A couple other points on some of the kind of mega trends that we're seeing around digital transformation in life sciences. So we've seen a lot happening with business models and business relationships, really operating in a much more collaborative environment. And it might be worth me, just taking a moment to pause and really point out, with the COVID-19 pandemic, really gratifying to see life sciences industry kind of emerge as one of the heroes of this pandemic. I mean, I think we've seen levels of cooperation, collaboration, data sharing, research sharing that we've never seen before, and it's really been a great experience. And a lot of those trends and new operating models have to be implemented in our system. So it's important that we have the agility to support these new business models and collaborations to be able to rapidly provision new systems that might cross organizational boundaries and support the interoperability of data sharing between organizations. I talked a little bit already about the shift that we've seen in workplace technology. So being able to be connected and collaborate and be productive, from anywhere on any device. And finally, around the cyber threats and the increasingly complex regulatory environment, we are required and continuing to develop an increasing amount of regulatory content to support R&D and eventually commercialization of drugs. And as we look at the shift, the journey to the cloud, one of the things to note is that in that cloud environment, it's a shared responsibility to comply with those regulatory requirements. When your applications are on premise and you own them, 100% of the risk is on you. But moving storage and compute and applications and other workloads to the cloud, it becomes a shared model, and you're able to leverage the investment that Microsoft and our partners make to ensure proper controls, procedures, and safeguards are in place over your data and computing systems. And you can benefit from the multiple layers of security and governance and operational practices that you get from the cloud. So at least portions of that shared responsibility are no longer a burden for you. With that, I'll put up a poll question. Megan, I don't know if you want to tell us how to respond to that. Okay, there.
Hi, folks, if you can see the poll, you can participate. It should be on your screen. We're just asking, what is the biggest challenge your organization is facing? Here, I see answers coming in. There you go. You're all there. Oh, very good. I'll give it a minute or so. We've got about 48% of you have voted. It looks like it's a very wide array of responses, which is great. We've got about, it's almost evenly distributed. Around 22% have said shift in IT strategy or roadmap. 27% are around regulatory challenges in highly regulated areas. 21% around cybersecurity. I think the 5%, so that's the lowest, is the scale and flexibility of the tech stack. And 23% around time versus cost pressures. I think I'll go ahead and close it now, Dave, and then you can respond to that.
Okay. Very good. That's good to have that information.
All right, that 30%, the winner being the regulatory challenges in a highly regulated environment. So speaks to your expertise, which is great.
All right, if we could go to the next slide. There we go, thank you. Yeah, so we know the current sort of operating model and regulatory environment for life sciences has its origins in on-premise, single systems, somewhat of a simpler environment, and that's when most of the regulations were developed and guidance produced. And obviously the rate of change has accelerated. There's a pretty significant migration to cloud environments. The benefits, the agility, the scale, the platform for innovation, is a no-brainer, and it's really pushing on some of the requirements that we have from our legacy models, thinking of computer systems validation and the approaches that are encoded in our regulatory systems to newer models like computer software assurance, and where the direction is going for continuous validation and sort of the newer, more flexible compliance environment. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we turn it over to USDM here in a second. I'll just finish then with introducing USDM and our partnership that we have with them. We're super excited to be working with them today for all of the reasons I just mentioned. We've recently formalized our partnership with them and worked with them to develop a new offering. They also have a portfolio of offerings that they have had in market for the last 20 years, but we're really excited about their new offering called Unify Public Cloud for Microsoft Azure. We're able to bring together our technology stack, our industry leading cloud platform with their deep expertise in compliance and cloud assurance. So it's our goal together with USDM to make your journey to the cloud easier and faster, and get that time to value accelerated for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vishal Sharma, and we'll talk a little bit more about USDM and the Unify Public Cloud. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you all for your time today. My name is Vishal Sharma, and I lead Digital Transformation Group at USDM. I would like to take the next few minutes and talk about Unify Public Cloud as an offering. As Dave stated, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the things that's happening all around us in general in the life sciences. So our goal from the inception to bring this type of innovative solution in the marketplace was to create a package offering for Microsoft platforms to help all life sciences customers accelerate their journey of a regulated workload moving into the cloud. And we believe this innovative solution and approach will bring our collective learnings, having been in this industry for the last 20 years or so, and some of the accelerators that we built over the last 20 years to expedite the customer journey, your journey to the cloud, so that you can take advantage of some of the things that Dave outlined, some of the innovation happening all over the places, right? So we wanted to expedite that journey. And as Dave also stated, some of the challenges looking at the CSP in general, where it came from and what it was originally designed for versus the pace of innovation that cloud brings, some of the emerging technology brings, keeping up with that pace. So we looked around in our space to find out how others are addressing this type of challenges. And what we found was a lot of the cloud compliance are still kind of handled in a very siloed approach and doesn't quite have or doesn't quite address the challenge of operating in a very fluid, very dynamic cloud environment like Microsoft Azure, like the public domain, the public cloud, with the flexibility and the scalability needed to support business need. So we really felt, and we wanted to be part of that change to bring this type of innovative solution into the marketplace that not only helps you bring something in the initial state of compliance, but allows you to maintain that continuous state of compliance. And obviously, we wanted to come up with something that addresses all tech stack that Dave was talking about, whether it's an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or a software as a service. And obviously has to be scalable and flexible. As your business grows, you should be able to grow with it. And the other thing we wanted to make sure was, as part of this package offering, we always wanted to make sure, because if you really think about life sciences industry in general, and the very wide spectrum, whether you are in early discovery or R&D or clinical or manufacturing, post-market, whichever spectrum you fit in, compliance is always like considered as a barrier. And we wanted to change that paradigm so that we wanted to make it more of an enabler so that you can adopt some of these cloud services, emerging technology, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, to speed up your innovation, to get your product faster to the marketplace. So we really wanted to change that paradigm, so to speak. The other thing we have done as part of when we were kind of contemplating this solution, we wanted to make sure we seek some advice from our early adopters. So we managed to work with some of our customer to see how this type of package offering, and I'm going to talk about a little bit in more detail what this solution is all about, to seek their guidance, learn from that, and bring it as part of this package solution that can benefit the larger customer base within the life sciences industry as well. So, and again, this solution is designed for both existing Microsoft Life Sciences customer who is already kind of using some of the cloud services and leveraging some of the cloud, what cloud has to offer, as well as it's also designed for new customer who is kind of in the planning phase or thinking about moving some of the workload from their on-prem or hybrid to the public cloud, in this case, the Microsoft Azure. If I go to the next slide, Megan, I still cannot see. All right. So let's take a moment and think about what that typical journey and looks like from the regulated workload in the cloud perspective. As I said, industry in general is a pretty wide, pretty broad. So depending on where you fall within that spectrum, different organizations fall under different maturity state. Some are really very early on trying out some of the cloud services. So there is awareness, some of the training is happening. Some are doing proof of concept. Some has already gone a little bit further down the road. They started approving some of the workload and they started experimenting with it. But some are really, really getting into a kind of medium level of complexity where they started leveraging computer software assurance more than traditional computer system validation, and it started leveraging more and more automation side of it. And we are keenly aware, because depending on where you fall within that maturity assessment, state, we realize not all workloads is going to move at once, right? So the adoption framework that you're going to follow is going to follow slightly different route depending on where you fall within that maturity statement. But the one thing we recognize, even though you have a cloud first or you already kind of all into moving that workload, not everything is going to move at once. So there has to be some structured journey map charted out for you based on your business priority so that you can move along those paths. The other thing we wanted to make sure while moving into this journey, your internal compliance team learn and gain that experience by taking increasingly complex projects and moving those workloads into the cloud as well. And obviously, since the paradigm is changing, especially if you are going from on-prem to cloud, some of the policies, some of the procedures, some of the training, they must be modernized to address some of the cloud infrastructure. For example, now all of a sudden we start talking about infrastructure as a code as opposed to installing a hardware and installing a software, right? So the paradigm is shifting, and we're going to talk about some of those aspects as I move through the presentation. Let me see if I can go to the next slide. Now, let's talk about, I know Dave highlighted on a very high level being a life sciences organization and some of the challenges we face. And this was actually reflected by the poll question that we just kind of looked at, we operate under a highly regulated environment. So anytime we introduce any innovative solution, in this case, the package offering that we are talking about, Unify Public Cloud for Azure, we have to make sure it can help you accelerate your deployment of your regulated workload on Microsoft Azure. As I said, not only achieving that initial state of compliance, but allows you to, or provides you the framework for that continuous state of compliance. So you have the GXP controls regardless of what cloud services, what infrastructure, what software as a services you are leveraging within that platform. The other thing we wanted to make sure we address was the question of flexibility and the scalability. So the reason is very critical, depending on the cloud adoption, the journey map we were talking about, everyone has a slightly different journey map, right? And we wanted to make sure the model that we come up with is flexible enough so that it can move with your speed, with your prioritization. And it has to be based on the life sciences best practices from ground up, so that compliance doesn't become more of an afterthought, more of a part of your design. So that's the reason we felt having a predefined package approach to it allowed us to address those both flexibility and the scalability question pretty nicely. The third thing that we were kind of looking at is, and this is kind of like obvious from a time and cost perspective, it's not only delivering the cloud compliance and reducing the risk, how we're going to do something and what's going to allow us to speed up this whole thing, right? So that's where having some organization like USDM and their deep experience like in this regulatory environment, we wanted to build on it. And we wanted to build the accelerator we're going to talk about, bring that domain knowledge and expertise, and be able to package this so that it can be offered to life sciences organization at a very competitive pricing as well. Now let's talk about what this Unified Public Cloud solution is all about, right? So if you look at from the solution perspective, there are three core components with the underpinning of this continuous cloud compliance. Let me go from the left and right. So those are three core components. Those are services, accelerators, and deliverables. So if you look under services, some of the things are highlighted are to ensure these are the services elements that's going to be available for you as part of the package that allows you to look at from vendor audit and vendor certification to prove someone like Microsoft has a pretty robust quality management system. There is a qualification to prove your infrastructure functionality built and perform for compliance ground up by design, not afterthought. And I talked about this instantiation qualification. So the whole paradigm is shifting. If you recall old days where you had to buy a whole bunch of server, install a whole bunch of software, and then maintain what piece of software is installed in which piece of hardware, right? So those days were more of an installation qualification. Now what happens, cloud makes that is very, very easy. You use the formation, you define once what you want to spin up, you click on a button, whether you spin up one server or thousands of server, it instantaneously happens, right? So now it's more of an infrastructure as a code. So we had to come up with the model that allows us to do that configuration qualification rather than traditional computer system installation qualification, so to speak. We also wanted to look at qualification to prove all the services functionality available through cloud services, and those are built and performed for compliance as well. And I'll give you some examples, especially for Microsoft Azure. When we were looking at it, we wanted to make sure all the access management are part of this package, like your Active Directory or Azure AD. All of API management are covered. Something like DevOps are covered. Since we are moving and more workload in terms of data workload, so we wanted to make sure the data lake is covered. Some of the SaaS applications are covered as well. And obviously, we wanted to package a mechanism that allows you to look at from the qualification of what I like to call the intended use of configuration as well as the intended use of workflows, because that's where your business processes are changing, the workflow, the model is changing, right? The way we work because of this whole pandemic situation is changing because you are collaborating outside of your four walls, so you are bringing more partners, more supplier. So we wanted to make sure there is a mechanism built into it that allows you to do that intended use as well. If you look at the middle section of this solution, which is the accelerator, and this is where we bring being an exclusively life sciences focused organization who has a deep experience on both domain and the regulatory aspect, we wanted to make sure we build on it. And that's where our cloud assurance is a trademark that allows us to keep any piece of services or software in a continuous state of compliance. We also wanted to make sure we bring impact assessment, and some of you familiar with the risk assessment. This is the high-level risk assessment. So we wanted to bring that element that's going to help us speed up your cloud adoption. So we wanted to make sure those accelerators are part of this package as well. Obviously, as I talked about, modernizing procedure and control, more geared towards public cloud infrastructure rather than just the traditional computer system validation. So we wanted to bring that elements into it. And anytime you bring some new innovative solution, there is a change management right underneath it. So we wanted to make sure all the change management are geared towards the system and the services in a public domain, public cloud domain. And from a qualification package, if you really think about the framework, the validation framework, the activity associated with it, all those are built as an accelerator so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you want to bring new cloud services or new cloud applications. So there is a framework already packaged that for you. The last one is the deliverables. So every time we engage with the customer, the very first thing we have to ensure as part of that engagement, we produce what we like to call the defensible set of deliverables. So knock on the wood, if you get audited, end of the day, you should be able to defend those and not having to worry about whether you are in compliance or not. So we wanted to take that burden off of your hand and make it as part of the package offering as well. And same thing with the assurance report and the cert that I talked about. If you look at underneath all these three core pillars, there is a continuous cloud compliance piece. So all these, while engagement is happening, fits into our cloud compliance, continuous cloud compliance framework so that not only you achieve your initial state of compliance, but this actually program allows you to maintain your infrastructure, your platform, your software as a service in a continuous state of compliance as well. Now, let's talk about how this new assurance architecture that we designed for Azure looks like. And this is the view that I'm presenting, what I like to call a system view of the architecture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow left to right and bottom up. So in the middle, if you look at, there are different color code. So if we go from a bottom, like the color, the yellow color that actually represents, which is kind of managed layer from the Microsoft Azure perspective. And that's where your global data centers, the physical hardware, and often you don't even see it because it's a hidden layer. And then there is a virtual layer. That's where all of your foundational services on the cloud side comes in. And then there is a layer that are represented by two different sets of blues, the light blue and the dark blue. So that's what kind of falls under customer responsibility. That's where you start interacting with the infrastructure. You build your access management, your security, your cloud provisioning, your own infrastructure, and how you're gonna create like your BPC and those kind of stuff. Then you go higher up. That's where you start building your own business specific build infrastructure. You start commissioning services. And then on top of that, you start rolling out your business application. On the left-hand side, that's where we wanted to package some of these elements for you so that you don't have to deal with them one at a time. So this package actually takes care of your access management, your API management, your change management, your DevOps, your data lake, your SharePoint. And in some cases, if you have a Microsoft 365, we can assess and include that as part of the package as well. On the right-hand side, that's where you saw the package solution when I was talking about all the services, all the accelerators, all the deliverables. We wanted to make sure every tech stack layer are addressed through services, accelerators, and deliverables so that every layer of those tech stack are in full compliance in the initial stage as well as the continuous state of compliance as well. Now what I would like to do is we looked at it from the system view from an assurance architecture perspective. Now, when we get into engagement, when you start working with the USDM, this is what I call the assurance architecture, more of a process view. Just imagine or try to visualize how that engagement is going to roll out. So obviously, every client engagement starts with what we call the three-step process of the alignment. assessment, and the implementation. So during alignment, what happens is we look at what the vendor assurance report looks like, what's the vendor certification. So one thing, and Dave did mention that the whole FDA, if you look at their outlook and this regulation, this guideline is going to be coming pretty soon, sometime in September. That actually takes us from this paradigm of thinking, very traditional way of doing computer system validation, to more of an assurance area, right? That allows us to look at what Microsoft already does in terms of assurance and build on it rather than duplicating that effort. So during that alignment, we'll look at every client thing and say what they already have. We try to understand their intended use, the type of intended use I was talking about. Look at what they already have in place in terms of how they operate today. What are the standard operating procedure? What methodology they follow? From a development perspective, you're going to be hearing a lot more software as a medical device, software getting kind of built into pretty much every edge device and all. So how that's going to change that landscape, we look at from that perspective. Then we try to tie it to more of a broader health check, what you have in your kind of technical landscape. So we look at both from a procedural standpoint as well as the technical configuration standpoint. And that allows us to do both procedural and the technical assessment. And we produce that report back at you and provide you the assessment report. And then once you provide your approval, then we start making recommendation on what are the proposed procedural changes that you have to make to comply with this dynamic nature of the public cloud. And then we look at from the technical configuration perspective as well. And once we get approval from a client side, then we start updating your standard operating procedure to match with what is demanded by new paradigm, and we'll make recommendation. In some cases, we help our customer implement those configuration as well, and that allows us to produce more of a compliance report, get your approval, and we do value confirmation because every engagement we are engaged with our customer, we wanted to make sure we are driving the value. So we do that value confirmation. And if you look at underneath all of these, alignment, assessment, and implementation, all of these are actually feeding all that information back to our cloud assurance program that allows us to take that, consume that, and then help you maintain, whether it's infrastructure or it's a platform or software as a service, that continues the state of compliance. This also kind of fits into the qualification stage of some of the stuff that I talked about. So if you look at in the middle, so we take some of the input, not some, actually all of the input from the previous one and feed into that. What that does is in the middle, if you really think about it, that's the cloud infrastructure, that's the landscape. That covers the SharePoint, let's say, as an example, application. Then you have a framework as a DevOps that allows you to build GxP compliant piece of software. And then you have access management as a data lake. That's what we are starting as a package with. But down the line, you're not limited with those. We'll be introducing more services as part of the package offering as we move through this journey. This also actually follows the qualification plan that I was talking about that covers your system requirements specification, the configuration specification, and then allows us to get the approval, execute on it. Sometimes we leverage more of automation, piggyback on what Microsoft already does, but provide some additional automation wherever we feel that's going to add value as well. And then once we get the client approval, that becomes your qualification report. Then you are released for production use, and you release that piece of thing for your production use without having to worry about whether you are maintaining that compliance state or not. And then towards the end of that engagement, we also offer, if you are ready to move some other regulated workloads into the cloud, we work with you, we help you assess that, and then we create a roadmap for you to move those additional workload into the cloud as well. And all of these actually fits into that common underpinning that I was talking about on the cloud assurance program as well. Now, the question is, why build such a thing, right? Why this is needed? And if you recall, Dave was talking about this whole acceleration towards cloud, the changing nature of the workplace, and the ability to leverage cloud for high-end computing or storage or high-end of data analytics, especially leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning in a variety of different areas, whether it's a drug discovery or it's just the detecting something on your x-rays or some of the diagnostic, right? Wherever the use cases are. Our idea was from a very early days I would say, very early inception, how we can make this compliance in a public cloud infrastructure as an enabler so that you can truly expedite that journey to the cloud. So the very first thing we wanted to focus was on continuous cloud compliance. We wanted to take that burden off of your hand and wanted to make sure you should be able to reduce the compliance risk, achieve that continuous state of compliance, and keep building your compliance knowledge as you take on more and more complex projects and start moving more regulated workload into the public cloud. So obviously we wanted to accelerate that journey. And for that, we needed something very structured that you can map out based on your business priorities, based on your strategic initiative, and it still offers something as part of the prepackaged solution that fast tracks your innovation and allows you to focus on core business rather than having to worry about the technology, the infrastructure, and the compliance aspect of it. We also touched on the flexible adoption model. We wanted to make sure those are there, and scalability is the key. But at the end, none of these actually matters if it doesn't help you realize the value, the business value. And that's where the core focus was when we were coming up with this solution. We wanted to truly speed up that deployment and adoption for Azure and Microsoft Business Application. And it has to be cost effective. That's the reason the bundle solution, the package offering makes sense. And obviously we wanted to make sure we are building something that allows you to focus on what I like to call the value creating activities rather than focusing on value consuming activities. So that was the core of it as part of the package offering. Now, let me take a moment, and I know I talked about quite a bit of the concept, why we wanted to build something like this, what are the values, what are the benefits. But very early days when we were contemplating this solution, we wanted to make sure the idea has a merit, right? It has a true value for our customer base. So we worked with one of the largest pharmaceutical company and collaborated with them very early on. The idea was we got into a situation where we wanted to solve a problem. And let me describe that situation for you. So obviously, like, it's one of the largest pharmaceutical companies, so they had a very well-defined SDLC and the CSV, but they were not designed for public cloud, so to speak. So they were not geared towards, in this case, the Azure DevOps. And obviously, there were no standard SOPs purely defined for that. And infrastructure, in this case, the Azure and the DevOps in particular, was qualified in the beginning for non-GXP type of intended use, not for GXP type of intended use. The challenge was internally given to the team to figure out how we can leverage DevOps, that they were very, very instrumental bringing non-GXP type of application. How could they leverage the same framework for GXP? In this case, they wanted to create this intelligent agent that could assist all the folks within the clinical trial area who can extract the information from both GXP system as well as the non-GXP system through the same virtual agent. So that idea, that challenge was posed to internal team, and we were kind of very privileged to collaborate with them in a very early stage to solve that problem. And some of the concerns that they had initially was, even in a DevOps, the lack of enforcement and the sequence of steps to ensure the compliance was built in as part of the design. And then approval challenges, lack of understanding how to best to use the DevOps tool to meet that GXP type of thing. So those were some of the challenges. And then we kind of helped them address that. So we defined the project. They were using Azure Stack with the natural language processing tools. So we kind of helped them develop the governance structure and the workflows for the GXP use cases that I was talking about. And obviously part of this whole engagement was creating that awareness, education, and bringing some of the best practices from our 20 years in the business to help them create that framework that met all the GXP related requirements. We also kind of brought some of the technological aspect where we managed to use electronic signature that allowed them to do multi-factor authentication as well. And towards the end, actually, what we managed to do was manage to create this master assurance plan for them that actually addressed both GXP, non-GXP, software as a medical device, and had a true differentiation how to do the intended use assessment so that you can say what level of formal testing needed versus what you can do in formal testing, what you could leverage on vendor executed testing as well. And this actually truly made a difference how they were perceiving public cloud and Azure DevOps in particular, and now they are realizing the value, how they can take something like this from their pilot project to implement enterprise-wide. So every piece of software actually follows the same framework, and they don't have to worry about that whole framework and the process being compliant as well. So this one was a really, truly a kind of, I shouldn't say revolutionary, but had a huge impact how they thought about leveraging something in a public cloud in this enterprise-wide without having to worry about compliance and really tie to their business initiative. And that's going to speed up their innovation time, getting their product to the market faster as well.
Hey Vishal, I would just add to that. I mean, I think the DevOps example is a really great starting point because it is somewhat limited in scope and it's a lower risk environment, less complicated environment to implement this type of compliance framework. So it's really a great place to start, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and if you look at the trend, and Dave touched on it a little bit earlier as well, the outlook from FDA in terms of cloud compliance in general. Since they are moving from this traditional computer system validation where you had a whole bunch of documentation, that's where you started from. Then you started thinking what I need to test, right? Then you started introducing risk-based approach in some capacity. Then the critical thinking, are they truly making a difference? Are they really making your product more safer? So the critical thinking came at the end. Now the paradigm is shifting. Now the pyramid, so to speak, is, so it's a kind of flipped view, right? So you have a more critical thinking up front. Then you are looking at truly from a product and the safety first, applying a true risk-based approach, then determining what you can leverage from vendor assurance already, because if something is already tested, why you want to duplicate that effort, but rather building on that, bringing more automation as part of it, and truly becoming a risk-based so that you can truly make your product and process, your quality, your operation, your manufacturing process safer than where you started from. And FDA actually fully believes in it, and the guideline is going to come out in September. And that's going to, I believe that's going to change the paradigm, how we think about this whole cloud compliance in general. And I think it's changing for the good. And I think it's going to do a lot of good for life sciences industry in general, because of it's a safer product, safety part of the design, your recall, your return, everything that touches, and eventually it's going to save lives, in my opinion, by making a product and the process safer. So that also validates some of the thinking that we had when we were conceptualizing this product in terms of packaging, what we're going to offer, how we're going to bring that to the marketplace as well. Now, if you look at USDM regulatory compliance, the domain and the technology stack, the cloud compliance is in our DNA. That's what we've been doing for a long time. And some of the learning, actually, we wanted to make sure some of the learning that we have done for other cloud platforms, other software as a services, they were brought into when we designed this package. So we wanted to make sure those things are included, and all of our life sciences customers should be able to leverage those. And obviously, these are some of the things that are going to look obvious to you, but I just wanted to highlight a few of these. Obviously, every time when we move to the public cloud, a lot of times the tendency is to look at, in a very silo view, look at one product, one services, one solution. But the way I view the cloud is, I view this as a investment, very long-term investment in the technology platform that allows us to do a lot of this good and innovative stuff, like whether it's on a compute side or a storage side or data side or analytics side, all these things. So you have to look at and plan for that end in mind rather than just focus very narrowly on one piece of that. Even though from an implementation perspective, you're going to execute one piece at a time, or a collection of few things at a time. Obviously, we want to make sure you implement based on life sciences best practices, and that's where our focus was, to bring all the learnings, our collective learnings, and all those things that we learn, all the best practices we developed, all the accelerators we developed becomes part of this package as well. And that actually helps you maximize your ROI and then kind of your engagement from a project management perspective. And in general, what I like to call the much broader organizational change management, because anytime you introduce new technology, new process, new product, you have to make sure you have the mechanism in place that allows you to adopt, and then you gain wider acceptance to it. And obviously, there is a general tendency in there to underestimate effort it takes to keep not only achieve that initial state of compliance, but continuous state of compliance. And we wanted to make sure all of life sciences customer can leverage from our learning so that the whole compliance thing comes at a very lower cost point and it's very, very flexible at the same time as well. And this is where we are in the journey with the Microsoft, and Dave touched on it. We are in the early stages of our partnership with Microsoft, and we have a bigger vision. Today, we are starting with the technology and the compliance, and that's the reason we are introducing this Unify Public Cloud for Azure. But as we move through in our journey, we wanted to make sure more cloud services, more business processes, we want to build on it so that consuming any one of these services from Microsoft Azure should be lower risk. You don't have to worry about from the compliance burden perspective, and it's very, very easy for you to consume it. And eventually our goal is to get into that insight, the real-time insight that has a true impact on what I like to call the high impact business outcomes by leveraging the data and analytics, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning we talked about, and should be able to operationalize it. And I think that's where Microsoft big vision is as well, to help life sciences customer to leverage those innovative technology and make it easier to consume without having to worry about the compliance piece of it. And that was, I believe, my last slide. Let me hand it off to Megan for some last minute thought and conclusion.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Vishal. That was great. We did have a couple questions come in. I think you talked a bit about your client and the the process through that. One of the questions I think from Luke Vaus around sort of asking how they used it, but I think very specifically, are they using everything? And this can go with another example as well. But and how long did it take them to get fully implemented? And in that, were there any surprises or lessons learned?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are three parts to it, right? So initially they were looking at because the Microsoft Azure was already in place, and they were kind of qualified for non-GxP type of use cases. So the idea was how we can come up with the framework so we can turn that same framework for efficiency, and that is something they're already familiar with, but they were having some challenges turning that into for GxP use cases. And that's where we wanted to focus on, because that's where we saw the value of scaling enterprise-wide. So we focused on that, making sure Azure DevOps, and they are using for entire development framework, from writing a user stories to turning that epic and turning that into a kind of test cases, and leveraging all Azure DevOps from a repo to how automation testing and results, and giving them the Azure board for how they are moving through the process, and bringing all the business side of approval, right? So anytime you write a quality test plan, you wanted to make sure your stakeholders are aware of it and they provide you appropriate approval before we move too far into the process. So we wanted to make sure not only the technical aspect, the business aspect, the quality and the QA aspect kind of brought into the same efficient workflow as part of the Azure DevOps, so that they don't have to go and outside of that framework to seek for additional approval. And in my opinion, that actually made a huge difference in terms of not only gaining efficiency, that was the key, but they didn't have to worry about the compliance, because every signature, every data lineage, electronic signature were all part of that efficient workflow. And I believe that made a huge difference. Now, from the lessons learning was obviously, I think the one thing we were contemplating was how much automation we can bring as part of the first phase of the project, right? There was a two side to it. One side wanted to go fully automated. The second side wanted to go a little bit incremental. So we took kind of a little bit of hybrid approach in a hindsight. If we have the mature organization, my belief is we should move more and more towards automation, because that reduces kind of error dramatically, in my opinion, and that makes that workflow overall very, very efficient. So I believe that was kind of one of the learning, and hopefully as we engage with more life sciences customer, different scenarios, we can bring some of those learnings and really kind of help guide that process towards more of automation, leveraging the accelerator that I was talking about as well. And I think that's going to be helpful.
Right, right. Well, that's great. We have another one from Eddie Rulas around, is the Azure cloud also GDPR compliant, and how is data localization requirements met?
Sorry, Megan, what was the, I missed that middle part. How, would you mind repeating that?
Is it GDPR compliant, and how is data localization requirements met?
Yeah, so this happens to be one of the European country where you have the strictest GDPR. So from a data residency and data storage, and Microsoft does all of these by design in some of the offering. So some layer of those compliance are already built in. As part of this project, what we did actually, we ensure anything added on top of it from a framework perspective, whether it's a data at rest, data at motion, those are covered. How data was communicated and transmitted were kind of covered with all the security that was kind of needed. So we ensured that. Then we added a kind of framework, the compliance framework in this case, to ensure all those layers that data kind of moves through are part of that compliance framework as well. So yes, to answer that question, we kind of gone through all those layers to ensure all those layers are kind of compliant as part of that overall framework.
Good, good. And then
Yeah, and I
Luke,
would just
go ahead, Dave.
add a couple of points there. I mean, as Vishal mentioned, GDPR is a European regulation, but Microsoft has implemented it globally, so we adhere. That's our minimum bar, if you will, globally. And for data localization, we've got over 100 data center physical locations worldwide with availability in 140 countries. And so we have I think I can say it's the best coverage, but if it's not the best, it's I'm pretty sure it is. But anyway, we've got excellent coverage for data sovereignty.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's good to know. And we did have one more question from Lucas Fernandez around, does the USDM implementation services support both GXP and, forgive me on this one, is it ISO 27001 compliance out of the box?
Yeah, so as part of the packages, I mean, anytime we bring any innovative solution, GXP control, as I stated, is part of the design. We also like, since we have entire practice around regulatory compliance, so we do follow and help customer with the ISO type of certification guidelines and compliance. So those are all part of the design when we bring something to the marketplace.
Great. Well, it sounds like those regulatory boxes are checked indeed, right? So
Absolutely.
good stuff. Yeah. Well, I think we did have one question about presentations, and just to let folks know, you can download the presentation. The slides are there. There's also a data sheet for Unified Public Cloud for Azure available here, but we'll also include these links as well, as well as the presentation in that post follow-up email. So rest assured. But in closing, I just want to, thank you, Vishal and Dave. Great job, really just informative. And a lot of depth to that. So I think it's great and super useful for folks. And I want to thank everybody for attending our Health Impact Live webinar series. And we'd like to thank Microsoft and USDM Life Sciences for supporting our ability to fulfill our mission to assist and guide healthcare leaders through digital transformation around the globe. And we hope to see you all at a future in-person event, and until then, virtually at our webinars and virtual events. So thanks so much for joining us today, and be sure to complete the survey. And thank you, Dave and Vishal.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.